Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video with Swaggle. And in this video, we're taking a look at Go Collect's hottest trending comics for the week of August 7th. Now, for those who don't know, Go Collect puts out weekly articles. They analyze the hottest selling comic books based on volume of sales and increase in movement in the market. So think of these 5 books as the ones that are really starting to get liquid out there in the market. But of course, before I get into the list, if you guys could drop me a like, comment, subscribe if you're enjoying the content, help support the channel doing those things, I would appreciate it. And also, SwaggleHouseComics.com. Got my book on there, Sanity, in store now. Head on over to the shop section of the website. You'll see all the covers there. Of course, cover D and cover E are already sold out. Cover B has literally a few more copies left before it's all gone. And cover C, not that much further behind with, a handful of copies still left in shop. So I am pretty confident we're going to sell out of all of the variant covers, which is cool. But there are still, of course, your classic cover A's that you can pick up for yourself. But head on over to the store. I would really appreciate it. If you really want to help support the channel, this is the best way to do so, SwaggleHouseComics.com. But with that being said, let us get into this list here today. Now, of course, the list is written by Matt Tuck. I will put a link in the description if you guys want to do your own reading, but I will break it down for you here today. Of course, it's been a little while since we've had our list. I've been on the road, so haven't been able to stay on top of it. So happy to get back into it. And coming in here at the number 5 spot is a very cool book to see on this list. This one right here is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles number 4, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 73rd slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, it's the book that came out in 1985, written and drawn by XMen and Laird, and would feature the 4th appearance of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Now, of course, we recently got the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles animated movie come out in the theaters, and a lot of people were actually talking about how, hey, the movie was actually pretty good. Some people were saying that it was on the level of Into the Spider-Verse. I don't know about that comparison, but there were a lot of Ninja Turtle heads out there that really did enjoy the movie, and a lot of people in the comic book collecting community have been big fans of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle properties for quite some time. I mean, I would actually say that outside of the superhero IPs, I feel like Ninja Turtles is, a close second out there. I mean, the history of the Ninja Turtle comic books is so important to the comic book community. This is truly one of the first, indie success stories. Obviously, TMNT number 1 is, one of the biggest grails there is in all of the Copper Age. And all of the TMNT books have been getting hot out there in the market. And I think that that's why, this one right here, number 4, is starting to see a little bit of love because, as we know, TMNT number 1 is really expensive. 2 and 3 have some first appearances. So here, number 4 is kind of like the outlier book, but I think that's the reason why people are looking for that next best thing. But as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. Census has it at 2,412 universal copies there. 9/8 have 276. Fair market value is 850. 90-day moving is 818. Hasn't been a sale in the last 30 days. But this is definitely a book, like many others, that had its massive shoot up during the boom, had its pullback, and now kind of where it sits, is kind of hovering around that $800 price point, which to me is something you still got to be a little bit careful about, being that this was only a $300 and $400 book back in 2020. Perhaps there's still more room for this book to correct, although it is only in the top 11% at the 9/8 level. So not a very easy book to hit in that 9/8 range. 9/6 is 476 on the census. The 30-day moving average is 350. 9/0 is 222. 30-day moving is 190. And then down here at the bottom, you might see it slab from time to time at the low grade. But generally speaking, when you go onto eBay looking for raw copies, typically they sell around that $100, $150, maybe $200 range, depending on the deal and depending on the grade. All right, let's move on now to the 4th hottest trending comic of the week. And the 4th hottest trending comic of the week is an all-time classic, speaking about 80s grails and 80s books that have a big significance to that of comic book collecting. We're talking about Watchmen number 1, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 66th slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, it's the book that came out in 1986, written by Alan Moore. That would be the first issue of the famed series, The Watchmen. Now, you guys don't need me to intro the series, but I'm going to do it anyways. We got that movie done by Zack Snyder that people love. Of course, there was an HBO series that came out with the same name that had, mixed reviews on it. But one of the reasons why this book is getting hot this week is that we are about to get another version of The Watchmen out there in pop culture, but this time it's going to be an animated movie. So a lot of people getting really, really excited about the Watchmen IP once again. And this right here, I think a lot of people are remembering that this is one of the most important culturally significant comic collecting books there is in all of comic book collecting. I mean, the 80s represented sort of the auteur era. You know, we talk about Eastman and Laird. We have figures like like Neil Gaiman, and we have figures like Alan Moore that were really, pioneering these incredible stories. And The Watchmen, I think, is, one of the all-time classic comic books there is, and I think that that's what makes it especially collectible to a lot of comic book collectors, which is why that not only is this book getting hot this week, but it is going to be an important book for all time. But as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. Census has it at 4,374 universal copies. 9/8 have 546 on the census. Fair market value 725. 30-day moving 705. Of course, like every other book during the boom, this is one that had a big shoot up in 2021. But based on where it's selling now, it feels like the pullback has maybe been a little bit of an overcorrection for this book. I mean, the current prices for it, here in June of 2023 was selling around that $650 range. You could rewind the clock all the way back to 2019 and see numbers similar to that. So you have to wonder if now is probably a decent time to pick up this book, and that's why it's showing up on the trending list. And then down here at the bottom, not going to see it slabbed at the low grade because it is an 80s book. But when you go onto eBay looking for raw copies, typically I see them being sold around that $50, $75, maybe $100 range, depending on the deal and depending on the grade. All right, let's move on now to the third hottest trending comic of the week. And the third hottest trending comic of the week is a classic Marvel Silver Age Grail. Of course, we're talking about Daredevil #1. New to the list this week, back on the list, now sitting at the 55th slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, it's the book that came out in 1964, written by Stan Lee, that would feature the first appearance of the Marvel superhero Daredevil. Everyone has been really excited that Charlie Cox is coming to the MCU. Of course, we know that next year in early 2024, we are supposed to be getting the Daredevil Born Again Disney Plus show, although based on the writer strike, everything that is happening right now, we don't actually know what is going to happen with the release schedule. So a lot of people are sort of uncertain with what is happening with the Daredevil character, but we know that he's going to be a staple in the MCU for years to come. We know that he's going to be a figurehead, and we know that Daredevil is one of the most popular Marvel comic book characters regardless. I mean, this is always going to be a classic Silver Age book, a classic grail for a lot of comic book collectors, but I do actually think that this one is one that maybe got a little bit overinflated in the last, comic book boom, and still has some ways to go down. When we talk about, the book and we look at the census and supply and demand, this is one of those books that actually has a higher census relative to that of the other Silver Age grails. But since I'm getting ahead of myself, let me actually jump into the numbers page and break it down for you guys here. Universal copies actually has 4,987, so about 5,000 universal copies for a Silver Age book. And of course, this is a lot higher than what you would normally see with, books that come out in the 63 and 64 era. 9/8 have 3 on the census, 9/6 is 31, but let's go down here to the 7/0 range where we can see a 30-day moving. 215 on the census, fair market value 7,500, but 30-day moving is actually in the $6,600 range. And you can see that this graph, shot up tremendously in the COVID boom. I mean, this is one of the books that really, really blew up. And currently where it sits at the $6,600 price point is still a lot higher than what you would see in 2019 and 2020, where the book was more around the $3,700 range. So we're still at 2x, and that is a little bit concerning if you've been following my comic book indexes, thinking about where we may be going in the next 6 to 7 months or so. Based on high interest rate environments, there still could be a lot of value that still needs to get sucked out of this particular book. If we look here at the 4.0 range, where the 30-day moving is 3,470, you can see that the value is still a lot higher here at the $3,500 range than that of 2020, where it was at the $1,459 range. So you have to wonder if this is a book, say in the 4.0 range, that is actually going to retrace all the way back to maybe I'd say the $2,000 price point. I don't think that that would be unheard of for a book to retrace back to that level. Similarly here to the 2.0 range, down in the low grade where it is very competitive because everybody just sort of wants a copy of this book. You can see that the current, selling of it is around the $1,700 range, but if you rewind the clock, to 2020, we're talking about the $1,000 price point or the $1,200 price point. So it wouldn't surprise me to see this book, correct a little bit more, in the next few months or so when we have kind of, the macro pressures, the macro environment, kind of pushing down the values of comic books. So kind of an interesting one. Let me know in the comments what you think about Daredevil 1, if you think that this book is a good time to buy or overvalued. But regardless, people are buying it, and that is why it is one of the hottest trending comics for this week. All right, let's move on now to the second hottest trending comic of the week. And the second hottest trending comic of the week is a classic Cop Rage book right here, a goodie. We're talking about Uncanny XMen number 244, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 50th slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, it's the book that came out in 1989, written by Chris Claremont, that would feature the first appearance of the character known as Jubilee. Everybody remembers Jubilee from the X-Men animated series from back in the day. Of course, we are still anticipating the animated series to show up in the MCU at some point. You have to assume that Jubilee is going to play a big role in the return of that cartoon, and that makes this book, very, very exciting as sort of a prospect and a spec book for a lot of comic book collectors. But even outside the animated series, one of the reasons why it's showing up on the list this week is that if you're actually following the current comic book storyline, as Matt points out in the article, they actually brought Jubilee back into the main title, main team. So that always has an effect on people's interest towards the character. But as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of those. Census has it at 5,438 universal copies there. 99s actually have one on the census. That would be an interesting one to see go up for sale. Curious to know what that would actually go for. 98s have 1,259 on the census. Fair market value is 270. 30-day moving is 220. And this is currently, in a position where I think, when we're talking about the values, we talk about, the retracements. I feel like now is probably a pretty decent spot to keep your eye out for this one. I think if you're spending $200 for a 9.8 for a first appearance of a character that is generally pretty popular, we're talking about the top 20%. The 2020 price for this was around $190, $180. So, basically we're kind of right back in line to the trend. So it seems like a decent time to pick up this book if you're somebody who's actually a fan of the character. Now, I don't necessarily think this is a book that is ever going to make anybody rich out there because there is so many on the census, but if you are a genuine fan, now seems like as good a time as any. Then, of course, down here at the bottom, not going to see it slabbed at the low grade, but when you go into eBay looking for raw copies, you can see them being sold anywhere from that $25 to $40 to $50 range to maybe $60 range, depending on the deal and depending on the grade. All right, let's move on now to the hottest trending comic of the week. And the hottest trending comic of the week is a return of a classic right here. Of course, we're talking about a George Perez all-time great, Wonder Woman Volume 2, number 1, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 30th slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, it's the book that came out in 1987, written and drawn by George Perez, that would feature the first issue of the second volume for Wonder Woman. Now, of course, this book right here brings a lot of member berries to a lot of comic book collectors out in the comic book market, but why is it showing up on the list this week? Well, we recently got a lot of murmurs within the news headlines that apparently the DC Universe is going to bring Gal Gadot back to playing Wonder Woman, that they might actually finish out their Wonder Woman trilogy, and that's got people excited about the Wonder Woman character once again. Of course, we also sort of suspected that James Gunn was going to be resetting the DC Universe, that he was going to be doing his recasting, but the irony is now that not only did he bring Ben Affleck back for The Flash, he also brought Gal Gadot, or is seemingly bringing Gal Gadot back to the DC Universe as well, and everybody's thinking to themselves, hey, why don't you bring back Henry Cavill? But, that's neither here nor there. Regardless, if we do get another Wonder Woman movie, that's got people excited about picking up this book once again. But as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. Census has it at 2,603 universal copies. 9/8 have 981, fair market value 180, 30-day moving 170. So not necessarily a book that is particularly expensive. Of course, it had its shoot up in 2021, like a lot of other books, but generally speaking, now seems as good a time to buy it as any based on, previous comps. I think that this was a book that actually back in 2016 was selling for more than it is actually selling for today when we initially had the first Wonder Woman movies. And then, of course, when you go here down to the low grade, not going to see it slabbed there because it is a 1980 book. But when you go into eBay looking for raw copies, typically they sell around that $20, $30, maybe $40 range, depending on the deal and depending on the grade. Anyways, that's all for this video. Those were Go Collect's hottest trending comics for the week. Let me know what you guys think. Do you guys have any of these books? Of course, drop me a like, comment, subscribe if you're enjoying the content. Also, head over to SwaggleHossComics.com if you want to pick up Sanity. I would very much appreciate the support. There's only a few variant covers left, and you guys would know that that's actually me telling the truth because if you saw my commercial, I burned the extra ones. Anyways, that's all I got for this video. Like, comment, subscribe. See y'all in the next one.